on a completely different note. And I don't know if this is going to get kicked off YouTube, because I don't know if this is copyrighted at all. I do not know. This story was written 14 years after World War II, because it says to write the book. But I'll tell you something. So Gregory Clark was born in 1892. Yeah, it's well back. He was a major in World War I. He was a journalist in World War II. He worked for the Toronto Star for a bunch of years. He died in 1977. I was 10. I was a kid. My dad had some great Clark books in the house. One of my favorites is called May Your First Love Be Your Last. Excellent title. He was an outdoorsman. He loved all that stuff. But he was in World War I as a major. And then in World War II, he was retired from the forces. He was working for the Star, and he went to the war as the war correspondent for Canada for the Toronto Star. So I'm going to read from this book, which has been out of print for a gabillion years, called The Best of Gregory Clark. And let's see if I can find it. Let's see. And I have literally no idea if this is going to get demonetized. I think it's page 12, if I remember correctly. Yes. So I am not good at this. This is my first time reading. So this has been on my mind a lot. I saw the movie Fury. That might not be immediately, you might not be able to immediately connect the dots to the story, but there are certain things in here. I watched a lot of war movies growing up. My dad watched a lot of war movies growing up. And so it is kind of interesting. I was born, and this is a stat again, I was born 22 years after World War II ended. 22 years. That's it. When I think about that, World War II ended 22 years before I was born. I just, that stat astounds me, because it seemed like an eternity before I was born. It was only 22 years. Anyway, the story's called La Mer, and you'll figure out what La Mer means when I read the story. It's La Mer, not La Mer, La Mer. It was several days after the Americans captured Cherbourg. Yeah, Cherbourg. Okay, I'm going to pronounce this again. I think it's an R. It could be an N. Cherbourg. Yeah, Cherbourg. I don't know where that is. It's in France. So it was several days after the Americans captured Cherbourg that I was able to find anyone on the Canadian front, down in front of Caen, again, I don't know what it is, who could think up any excuse for getting a Jeep and going north to see the famous port. And then some RCAF pilots of my acquaintance learned that there was lobsters to be had at Cherbourg. That, of course, you want to know where I get my tangents from? Well, as I go with the story. That, of course, is ample excuse for pilots aged 19 to 24 flying Spit 9s and Mustangs, so they came to me to invite me to come along. Pop, they said, for I was in my 50s. Pops, they said, for I was in my 50s. How would you like to run up to Cherbourg with us? Why, gentlemen, I exclaimed, as if I hadn't been hinting around about Cherbourg for days. They figured there might be less difficulty with the British and American control posts along the highways north if in a jeepload of young pilots, they had an old white side-burned war correspondent in the front seat who looked at first glance to be somebody of importance, if not a bishop in the chaplain service. So away we went through the incredible sand hummocks and lumps of nothing that had been Saint Lo, on up through the almost undamaged peninsula, showing us how the Americans fight, smashing one place to stupendous ruin and then galloping like the wind through mile upon mile with hardly a shot fired at the bewildered and fleeing enemy. This is World War II, by the way. And he's the war correspondent. And we found Cherbourg, silent in the sunlight, still dazed by the liberation, all of its mighty port facilities, its derricks and cranes and wonderful piers wrecked and ruined by the furious Germans who, up until a couple of weeks ago, had imagined themselves to be the masters of the whole world, whose hour of destiny, like a Wagner prelude, had sounded. This guy knows how to turn a phrase, I'll tell you. We parked our Jeep in the square. Puzzled American military police smiled us welcome and waved us onto the town. The square, the streets were deserted. From windows, eager, cautious faces peered out at us. My young comrades, lobsters in mind, figured that a tavern would be the likeliest place to find out about lobsters. We had not far to go. Again, it's a little antiquated language, but I love it. We had not far to go. Up the empty main street, out of the square, we had walked only a little way until we heard the sound of music. As we proceeded, the sound turned out to be stentorian singing. And as we, I have to look some of these words up, stentorian. And as we neared the source of the music, we realized that it was not only men, many men, but women singing. We descended the stairs into the cellar tavern. There must have been 300 men and women jammed into that big smoky room. And from a radio turned on full blast from a broadcasting station belonging somewhere to the Free French Underground, Charles Trenet, I've heard that name before, Charles Trenet, the famous French singer, was singing La Mer, a song he had himself composed, The Sea. And with him, tears pouring down their faces, their arms around one another's shoulders, embracing, sobbing, the whole quivering assemblage was singing in a kind of agony of joy. Taverns, of course, were out of bounds to the Americans, but when I explained to the protester in the din that we were Canadians, we were uproariously welcomed. So again, Canadians. And even through the splendor of La Mer, as Trenet recorded it, the word spread that Canadians were in the room. Ah, well, it was a fine, hilarious lobster hunt. A man of my own age, in a sailor's toque and blue and white striped jersey, took possession of me, and after about an hour, when my comrades were in quest of lobsters with a dozen young sailors as escort, he took me to see the town. We visited the docks, quays, crushed port facilities. We called at several houses so that I might be introduced to friends of his. In one small street, a knot of people was gathered outside a cottage, idly waiting at a closed door and apparently trying to see inside. Okay, I'm going to get a little misty right now because I know where the story's going. But you can see the last 2 pages, very, very after the war was still going on, but this place had just been liberated a few weeks earlier, and they're just, shell-shocked and stuff. But now it's going to get a little bit, I'm getting misty thinking about it. In one small street, a knot of people was gathered outside a cottage, idly waiting at the closed door and apparently trying to see into the windows. My old sailor explained quietly as we passed that a girl who lived in the cottage had been a sweetheart of a German soldier of the recent garrison. And the day of the liberation, a posse of Cherbourgers had cut off her hair. She was inside with her parents. Of course, as a war correspondent, I had already heard of several instances of this mob action against those who were called collaborators. To this day, I have never been able to figure out whether it was the sheer curiosity on my part, or perhaps journalistic inquiry, or perhaps above all, Trenet's La Mer ringing in my ears, for it is still my favorite of all small songs. But I turned to my old sailor and said, "Do you think we can see her?" We went to a neighboring house. A woman of that house went around the back of the houses by the walls. And in a few minutes, I was ushered secretly by the back way to the door of the besieged cottage. Give me a minute. I'm 58. A pallid gray man, moving slowly as if in deep shock, took my hand when the sailor introduced me. He listened as my old sailor explained that I was a chaplain. You see, my appearance suggested this even to tavern acquaintances. The man still holding my hand led me along a small dark hall with its florid purple wallpaper. Softly he opened the door and nodded me into the little darkened room. Again, the turn of phrases, the way this guy writes is just literally off the charts. Fantastic. On the bed lay what I thought at first was a child, the blankets pulled up to her chin. Her head was small, round, white, like the head of a china doll that lost its wig. Her eyes were closed. Of all the things I have seen in my life, this is one I am sorriest that I saw. The round, small, naked head, the ears so grotesquely bared, the large shadowed eye sockets, the mouth composed in a tiny figurine of utter despair. My sailor in the hall coughed briefly. The girl opened her eyes. She stared blankly at me. Then slowly, like a curtain's falling at the end of a tragic play, her eyes closed. We backed out. I hurried to rejoin my young comrades at the jeep in the square. They had lobsters. I hummed La Mer all the way home to the Canadian front so as to remember it, never to forget it. Man, that was 14 years ago. So this is written 1959, I would imagine. Last week, A.J. Green, who is a prominent person from back in the day, so this is 1959. Last week, A.J. Green came home from a holiday in England. He came back on a French boat. Hey, he said to me on the phone, I met a friend of yours on the boat. Oh, I said. My cabin steward, he said, a little clunky old guy who had been a sailor. He told me how he had met a middle-aged Canadian war correspondent. Yeah, this is me now. I'm a wreck. That's fine. Hey, he said to me on the phone, I met a friend of yours on a boat. Oh, I said. My cabin steward, he said, a little clunky old guy who had been a sailor. He told me how he had met a middle-aged Canadian war correspondent right after Cherbourg was liberated. Oh, no, I cried. He told me about taking you around town. About the girl, I asked. Yes, he said. When he described you, I said I knew you, and he asked me to be sure to tell you what happened to the girl. Go ahead, go ahead. I could hear Lemaire starting to orchestrate in my head. The German boy came back and married her. They went away. Her hair had all grown back in beautiful. Do you know what I said? God, I thank you. That is what I said. War is so small, so sad, so inexcusable. I read all of his stories that I could find. I got like 12 of his books. And there are some very, very poignant. Most of them are really funny and like they goes on about whatever. And but there are a few like that one that moved me to tears, basically. It's 2.5 pages to 3 pages of story. It is something. It is something in the world of darkness and craziness and whatever. It's something. And I'm glad I got to read that story. And I think the first time I read it, I was like 15 or 16 years old when I really got into Gregory Clark. The other books that we had never got this deep that we had Grandma Preferred Steak. We had Fishing with Gregory Clark. We had Outdoors with Gregory Clark. They're all the like camping and going out in the wilderness and whatever. It's like watching the Red Fisher show in a book. But this one, The Best of Gregory Clark, has there's a lot of funny stories in here, but it has 2 or 3 very, very poignantly introspective and like make my eyes misty stories. I do find that no matter what's going on in the world, and no matter how stupid people are, and no matter how needless some things are, that I will always be optimistic and hopeful for tomorrow. And part of that optimism is just by seeing stuff that's happened before. I mean, we're very repetitive species. This happened 22 years before I was born. That's it. Now, plus 58, so this is 78, 80 years ago. When you think about that, that story took place 80 years ago. And they had lives after that. That little girl in that little house, little cottage in the middle of Cherbourg, had a life after this. Now, I don't know how great a life she had, but according to this guy, she was 14 years later, happily married and, having a life. So I am optimistic. I'm always optimistic. I've always been optimistic. It's why I watch Star Trek. no matter what's going on in the world, no matter what's going on in my personal life, no matter what's going on anywhere, I'm going to hang around till tomorrow because I want to see what happens, no matter how bad things appear to be. And I do get sad sometimes. That needless, senseless, stupid death really bothers me. But in the end, I try to be better, and I try to impart a little sunshine into other people's lives. Now, to be said, I don't know if this is going to get demonetized. Not that I'm making any money off it anyway. I don't know how long copyrights last. That was a story from 1959. This book was printed. Oh my goodness. Let's see. My dad's writing in here. He gave it to me. That's my name. 1959. So this book was printed 1959 by Ryerson Press, Toronto. Greg Clark, by the way, is born in Toronto and died in Toronto. He was born in Toronto in 1892, I think I said, and he died in Toronto in 1977. I was 10. He lived his life there, except when he was a war correspondent, hanging out in France and stuff, and being a major in World War I. If you ever get around to reading a bit of biography in this guy, he has a wonderful way of turning a phrase, as I mentioned. But he's talking about how, like, he was like, how tall? I don't know if they tell you how tall he was in this little biopsy that he has here. He was extremely short, like a very, very small, very, very small person. Like, I don't think he was above 4'5" or 5 foot. And so he has a story that he was a private at the beginning of the war, and within a few months, he says that because he was too short to do stuff, that they made him a major. First a sergeant, then a major, because he couldn't do all the big stuff. That's not what happened. I think that somebody actually told the real story. They were involved in a huge fight one time where 90% of his troop got wiped out, and he was the only one that was left, basically, that had whatever. So he had to move up in ranks pretty quick. But he always makes light of his life and focuses on other people's lives that to him meant something. And he has a wonderful way of turning basically anything into a story. He says that a lot. A lot of people towards the end of his life says, because he published in the Weekend magazine, he published in the Star all the time, and like weekly. And how many times how one person can have all these stories about all these things over decades? You have to be making some of these stories up, or you're writing about somebody else and you're taking it as your own. And he says, no, I make stories too. Not make up stories, but I make stories. He was sitting at World War II. His younger brother was in World War II as somebody who was fighting in World War II. He's a war correspondent, and he was going out one night, and he doesn't know where his brother is. It's World War II. They're somewhere in Europe. But so he went to a pub one night, and he's sitting there having his dinner, and all of a sudden he hears his brother's laugh. He hadn't seen him in like a year because they've been separate for a year. And he calls the waiter over because, again, it's just anybody else like you and me would just walk over, hey, bro, haven't seen you here, and hug. He says, this is what you do. You go to the details. Hey, Garcon, come over here. I need you to give him this, oh, for crying out loud, this menu, and I want you to go over to the blonde kid over there and ask him for his autograph and say it's for his biggest fan. And so the waiter goes over there, and this kid, his brother, is with 20 sailors, and he's regaling of stories, whatever. And the waiter comes over, excusez-moi, there's a gentleman the next booth over, or a couple booths down, wants your autograph because he's your biggest fan. Oh, who's that? His brother. He stands up. He comes over, he runs the corner, and his brother goes, hey, Greg! So you make the story. Like this is going to be a story, and you make it better. And I have been known to slightly embellish some of my stories, but I've always appreciated about him. And he's got, like I said, I think I have 12 books in this house of his, and there's a few more that I want to get, but they're on Amazon. They're used because they've been out of print since 1977, and they're very expensive now. So I'm missing a few, very few. But I will pick up any one of his books at any time and start reading it because, you know, one of my favorite authors. That's it. That's all. I hope my reading to the general population was good. I was going to read the other one here because it was even shorter. It's called The Prayer, which isn't making me as misty, but it's a good one. But maybe if this works, I'll do that one. We'll say that. I hope I'm not going to be hired to do book readings, you know, on tape and or, you know, MP3s. That's not going to be my profession going forward, obviously. But I enjoyed that. So sharing it with you. You guys all stay safe, take care, and I'll talk to you soon.